I have 172.
I have 175.
175, never mind. I had the wrong circle.
You was to quit early.
No, I'm not a quitter. I'm not a quitter.
Evidentially, many groups and organizations within civil society help to compensate for the shortcomings of the international community, its lack of coordination in complex situations, its lack of attention to fundamental human rights, and to the critical needs of certain groups. Here we can see a concrete application to the principle of subsidiarity, which justifies the participation and activity of communities and organizations on lower levels as a means of integrating and complementing the activity of the state. These groups and organizations often carry out commendable efforts in the service of the common good, and their members at times show true heroism, revealing something of the grandeur of which our humanity is still capable.
Are these organizations that he's referring to like Doctors Without Borders or government, what are the organizations called that are non-government organizations that go into various countries?
NGOs?
Yeah, NGOs. Do you think that's what kind of he's referring to here?
Yeah, I do. And your citing of Doctors Without Borders is a great example. Lutheran World Relief, Lutheran Immigration and what is it? Well, yeah, but yeah, those kinds of players in the game, the ones who are picking up the slack where government efforts don't cover all the bases, don't fill all of the gaps. I think that's what he's talking about.
Habitat for Humanity falling into that category internationally as well now?
I would think so. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just have to say here that I'm finding it disconcerting that Sandy is kind of coming and going across the cross down here. There she is.
Sorry.
It's like pieces of you kind of, it's like you're an apparition and Jeffrey's just sitting there eating cereal.
She's being very spiritual today.
I guess so. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Either.
For many people today, politics is a distasteful word, often due to the mistakes, corruption, and inefficiency of some politicians. There are also attempts to discredit politics, to replace it with economics, or to twist it to one ideology or another. Yet can our world function without politics? Can there be an effective process of growth toward universal fraternity and social peace without a sound political life? Boy, that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
So long as there's a balance of power, I believe that to be true.
Well, the problem is anytime you try to accomplish anything on a collective level, it is politics. I mean, when you assemble a large enough group of people to try to accomplish something, you have a de facto political group because you're just going to have a point of view bent toward what it is you're trying to accomplish. That makes you a political force. You might not think of yourselves that way, but you effectively become a piece of political machinery at that point, once you have a consolidated point of view toward what you're trying to accomplish. At least that's how I remember it from my political science class.
And I think we're going to move into what he thinks politics could be.
Probably so.
Sounds.
Okay, who would like to start reading?
I'll read for a bit. The politics we need. Here I would once more observe that politics must not be subject to the economy, nor should the economy be subject to the dictates of an efficiency-driven paradigm of technocracy. Although misuse of power, corruption, disregard for the law, and inefficiency must clearly be rejected, economics without politics cannot be justified, since this would make it impossible to favor other ways of handling the various aspects of the present crisis. Instead, what is needed is a politics which is farsighted and capable of a new, integral, and interdisciplinary approach to handling the different aspects of the crisis. In other words, a healthy politics capable of reforming and coordinating institutions, promoting best practices, and overcoming undue pressure and bureaucratic inertia. We cannot expect economics to do this, nor can we allow economics to take over the real power of the state.
Oh, wow. How do you divorce economics from politics? And how do you divorce politics from economics?
I don't think that's what he's saying. I think there has to be a kind of a rational approach to balancing the two.
Yeah. Right, but politics must not be subject to the economy.
Right.
Nor should the economy be subject to the dictates of an efficiency-driven paradigm of technocracy. Well, okay.
Okay.
Wait.
Economics without politics cannot be justified.
Well, the politics, in a broad sense, the politics means that that different groups of people have come together because of a common, I don't want to say ideology, but a common frame of reference, perhaps. And so they have certain needs and desires that they want to be implemented in their society. And I kind of lost my train of thought when I was thinking about that.
Well, I'm just thinking about historically how much of our politics, how much of our political discourse has been dictated by economic policy and differences in economic policy, different ideas about economic policy. It seems to me a lot of economics has been central to a lot of our politics.
Well, you've got the trickle down effect. You've got the taxation of which level of the population. You know, it's definitely different approach by different parties within the United States.
And look, the biggest bill that's under discussion and debate right now is the COVID bailout.
Yeah.
And that's all about economic policy. And then there's the whole thing about whether or not to include the $15 minimum wage. And again, that's economics. And it doesn't matter how many economists you can trot out that point out that this would be a really good thing for the economy overall. You've got other people on the other side that are going to come out and say, no, it's going to crash businesses, small businesses, and, you know, but it's an economic argument. And it becomes a political football. And what gets lost in the whole discussion is what's the right thing to do for the people.
Yeah. Going on? In the face of many petty reforms of politics focused on immediate interests, I would repeat that true statecraft is manifest when, in difficult times, we uphold high principles and think of the long-term common good. Political powers do not find it easy to assume this duty in the work of nation building, much less in forging a common project for the human family. Now and in the future, thinking of those who will come after us does not serve electoral purposes. Yet it is what authentic justice demands. As the bishops of Portugal have taught, the earth is lent to each generation to be handed on to the generation that follows. Global society is suffering from grave structural deficiencies that cannot be resolved by piecemeal solutions or quick fixes. Much needs to change through, though, fundamental reform and major renewal. Only a healthy politics involving the most diverse sectors and skills is capable of overseeing its process. An economy that is an integral part of a political, social, cultural, and popular program directed to the common good could pave the way for different possibilities, which do not involve stifling human creativity and its ideals of progress, but rather directing that energy along new channels.
Anything in those last two paragraphs really catch anybody's attention?
It's an A for optimism.
You know, one of there are two words that kind of caught my attention. Just thinking over what we've been through here in this country over the last 4 years, and that was the words nation building. Because one of the things I've thought a lot about is that I think part of our problem in this country is that we have never finished the job of nation building. We are still very much a work in progress in terms of understanding what it means to be the United States of America. Our original constitutional debates still aren't fully resolved. I mean, the whole electoral college is a vestige of that, and seeing how that still plays out and how that still comes up. Debates between the slave states and the free states still, they have a different face on them now, but it's still the same kind of debate. It's states' rights versus federal. Those kinds of issues keep playing out in ways because we haven't really arrived fully at being one nation. We still see ourselves as a confederation of states, for good or ill. And so we keep doing the work of nation building without ever really fully becoming one nation. At least that's how it always often seems to me.
I agree.
Yeah, Pastor, I kind of agree with your main premise that the nation building is, or kind of what it means to be an American, probably needs work. But I'm not sure that your example of states' rights to federal powers is the right one. And only because I see those as a check on each other. And so, but I entirely agree with you that there's a, kind of a set of principles that needs to be eked out.
Yeah, and I would love to have long ongoing discussion about that, Bob, because sometimes they are a check on each other, and that's a good thing, and sometimes they are a check on each other in a bad way.
You bet.
Sometimes they're politicized to make it, weaponized.
Yeah.
Instead of
yeah.
consensus.
I think of the governor of Texas declaring that the whole state is now fully open for business.
And no masks are required.
Right, with no masks or other precautions required. And it's like, what a dumbass thing to do.
As long as no one leaves the borders of Texas, sure.
Well, and you talk about the United States and the good of the people. And then what is it? Yesterday, I'm reading that in parts of Mississippi, people are having to melt snow water to flush toilets because
Yeah.
I still don't have it.
they don't have water. They don't, Texas, they don't have clean water. You've got, it's all these, I just don't get it. I just
That's
don't.
a good time to introduce the pandemic.
Yeah. And again,
Welcome it in.
we don't have national standards for some things that we would do well to have national standards for. The failure of the Texas power grid is another really good example. It's like, why don't we have some kind of national coordination for these kinds of things? Because it's something everybody in the country needs.
Why do we have
States, right?
Navajo nations that don't even have water? They don't even have running water. And,
Yeah.
and that's 600 miles from here. Most people don't even have running water. How does that happen?
Well, we could make a long list of these things, and perhaps we should sit down and do that sometime. and deliver our grievances to Congress.
And to the Pope.
Your comment about nation building, I never really thought of it that way. It's a really interesting perspective on where our country is and what it's trying to accomplish and where it's moving towards. I think that's a really interesting perspective on what's going on.
Well,
It reminds me of a Far Side cartoon where God's looking at the earth just coming out of the oven and going, oh my God, it's half baked.
yeah. Well, and then you think of our national arrogance to go into nations like Iraq and Afghanistan,
Right.
and we've done it in South America and Central America, and say, no, this is how you should run your country. And it's like,
Right.
we're not even doing it at home. I mean,
Right. Exactly.
so, okay.
Exactly.
And the Pope sits there in Rome and at the Vatican and looks at us and goes, oh, silly people. Okay. 180.
Political love. Recognizing that all people are our brothers and sisters and seeking forms of social friendship that include everyone is not merely utopian. It demands a decisive commitment to devising effective means to this end. Any effort along these lines becomes a noble exercise of charity. For whereas individuals can help others in need, when they join together in initiating social processes of fraternity and justice for all, they enter the field of charity at its most vast, namely political charity. This entails working for a social and political order whose soul is social charity. Once more, I appeal for a renewed appreciation of politics as a lofty vocation and one of the highest forms of charity, inasmuch as it seeks the common good. Every commitment inspired by the Church's social doctrine is derived from charity, which, according to the teaching of Jesus, is the synthesis of the entire law. This means acknowledging that love, overflowing with small gestures of mutual care, is also civic and political, and it makes itself felt in every action that seeks to build a better world. For this reason, charity finds expression not only in close and intimate relationships, but also in macro relationships, social, economic, and political. This political charity is born of a social awareness that transcends every individualistic mindset. Social charity makes us love the common good. It makes us effectively seek the good of all people, considered not only as individuals or private persons, but also in the social dimension that unites them. Each of us is fully a person when we are part of a people. At the same time, there are no peoples without respect for the individuality of each person. People and person are correlative terms. Nonetheless, there are attempts nowadays to reduce persons to isolated individuals, easily manipulated by powers pursuing spurious interests. Good politics will seek ways of building communities at every level of social life in order to recalibrate and reorient globalization, and thus avoid its disruptive effects. No comments? Effective love. Social love makes it possible to advance toward a civilization of love, to which all of us can feel called. Charity, with its impulse to universality, is capable of building a new world. No mere sentiment, it is the best means of discovering effective paths of development for everyone. Social love is a force capable of inspiring new ways of approaching the problems of today's world, of profoundly renewing structures, social organizations, and legal systems from within. Charity is at the heart of every healthy and open society, yet today it is easily dismissed as irrelevant for interpreting and giving direction to moral responsibility. Charity, when accompanied by a commitment to the truth, is much more than personal feeling, and consequently need not fall prey to contingent subjective emotions and opinions. Indeed, its close relation to truth fosters its universality and preserves it from being confined to a narrow field devoid of relationships. Otherwise, it would be excluded from the plans and processes of promoting human development of universal range in dialogue between knowledge and praxis. Without truth, emotion lacks relational and social content. Charity's openness to truth thus protects it from a fideism that deprives it of the human and universal breath.
Can I make a comment? Not so much a comment, but maybe just kind of throw this out there that to begin with, and this has to do with charity and how to approach charity in our society. So I look at the events of January the 6th, and I see the people that were there that were attacking the Capitol. And so my initial thought isn't charity. But when I read what the Pope is writing here, I really have some tension and some conflict trying to resolve the anger that I felt towards those people that were storming the Capitol, and reconciling that with a need to be open-minded and charitable to others. That makes sense?
Why
I think,
do you have to be charitable to those people that have done such terrible and wrong things? I can't find any charity in my heart for them.
Well,
I think when it
the Pope
means
is talking about
understanding their
Pope,
perspective.
I was going to say the Pope is.
Did you mean?
Go ahead, Ellen. I'm sorry.
No, I'm on too much delay. I can't. It's okay. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I don't think the Pope is talking about love in the sense that we maybe are thinking about it, but I think this is more of an intellectual love, an agape love, where you make a conscious decision to be charitable. And I think I don't think he's talking about charity in the way that we may typically think of it, whereas we're being charitable by giving to others, by providing Fe y Esperanza with material and financial support. I think charity in this sense is more of a conscious decision to look at those people as, hesitate to say children of God, but I don't know, that's the first phrase that comes to mind. But so I don't think that the charity is like in feeling positive towards them, but I think acknowledging that they are God's creation as well. And so it's an intellectual love towards people. And I think that's an extreme example, but then I can think of all sorts of situations in my life where I may feel one way and then think, no, that's not the right way to look at this situation. That's not the right way to maybe judge somebody because of my own biases. And I've got to think about it. And then that's an intellectual, kind of doing a little bit of intellectual gymnastics to make that happen.
I think that maybe the issue that you seems that maybe you're dealing with is that I think that it is charitable and it's right of us to try to have empathy enough to understand, or to try to understand someone else's point of view and their motivation. And so, for me, I don't question that the people who did that are very committed to their own convictions that I disagree with, and that's what motivates them, but it doesn't excuse the behavior. And then also, I think it's key in here, it talks about its commitment to the truth. So I think the whole dilemma in that particular situation is that we have to understand that they are, many of those people are being motivated by their conviction of a lie or multiple lies that is not the truth. And so what happens in me in terms of charity is I wish to be able to somehow present the truth to them and then trust that they could make decisions based on truth that would be better societally. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's important to remember as we talk about this in this particular, charity is an English translation of the Latin caritas, which is a Latin translation of the Greek agape. So that is the deeper root, that kind of love that's being talked about here. And so, Phil, you're on the right track. It is a decisional love. In this particular instance, when we're talking about those people that stormed the Capitol, I think it's important to remember too, we can't attribute to all of them the same mindset. And we can't,
Several different.
There were some of them who were acting out of some kind of deep political conviction, and there were probably some of them who were just adrenaline junkies. And I mean, you would have to look at each one on a case-by-case basis, and true charity would mean that we would take time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But true charity would also demand that we would say, look, there are boundaries, and those boundaries were crossed. And those boundaries are there for the benefit of all of us, for the good of society, and that's why we all live within them. That is social charity. That's what the Pope is talking about here. This is how we love our society, our culture, our common good. We set lines. If we don't like the lines, we meet to discuss them and talk about how we can move them or make them better or make them apply more fairly to people. But we don't just unless it becomes absolutely unbearably oppressive to someone, we don't just storm across them.
To some of those people, that's what it had become. I mean, I know it's not all, but there's a kind of a group, a herd mentality that happens in a riot.
And
It makes me think of the man who in the house, when the people were, going through desks and taking pictures of things and trying to do this. And there's the one image that sticks in my mind, that amongst the, militia, violent, would-be assassins amongst them, there was the man who was up at the front and he was lifting his hands, he was praying. And I thought, this poor guy, he really believes that this is what God would have him do. He really believes that this is an issue of faith. So, I mean, I know they have all different motivations, but I mean, that just stuck in my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, that's just, anyway.
In terms of crossing boundaries as a matter of love, it gets tricky because we have some great examples in history where that has been done. This Sunday, we have in our gospel text, Jesus overturning the tables in the temple and driving out the animals. I mean, he's crossing all the lines, and not in a peaceful way, because he's concerned about the ways that the people are being oppressed. And it's reached a point where some major statement has to be made. We see great examples of civil disobedience in history where really oppressive laws had to be broken to point out how oppressive they were. But then we see examples like what happened on January 6th, where it's just violence for the sake of violence and motivated by untruth. So it's not an easy thing, and this is why it's important for us all to stay rational as we deal with these kinds of things. And that too is part of loving each other socially. I will try to go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really appreciate you spending time kind of going through this. I think the phrase that you mentioned that makes a lot of sense to me is the social charity, but within boundaries. That kind of resonates, with me, that it's not a libertarian kind of a situation where everything goes. To have social charity is to be concerned about others within the context of within the context of the human family, and working for the mutual benefit of everyone.
Yeah, and when you think about like Dr. King and his protests, his civil disobedience, it was always peaceful. He made a point that no one harms anybody. If we have to take the pain from them, that's one thing, but we will not inflict any pain. Even the example of Jesus in the courts of the temple, he did not inflict any harm on any person. In fact, it doesn't look like he harmed any animals. He just ushered them out of there, probably saved some of them from harm. And that's the difference. And what we saw on January 6th ended up with 6 people being killed.
And I think that's where in the concept of protest as a valid exercise, then violence and destruction become boundaries where when what you're doing in standing for your convictions begins to adversely affect other people, then that's where laws come in. That's where, like you were saying, that's where there have to be boundaries because we're talking about social charity is the good of the people, good of everybody. So you have to take that into account.
Okay, shall we keep moving?
I'll continue. The exercise of political love. There is a kind of love that is elicited. Its acts proceed directly from the virtue of charity and as directed to individuals and peoples. There is also a commanded love expressed in those acts of charity that spur people to create more sound institutions, more just regulations, more supportive structures. It follows that it is an equally indispensable act of love to strive to organize and structure society so that one's neighbor will not finish himself in poverty. It is an act of charity to assist someone suffering, but it is also an act of charity, even if we do not know that person, to work to change the social conditions that caused his or her suffering. If someone helps an elderly person cross a river, that is a fine act of charity. The politician, on the other hand, builds a bridge, and that too is an act of charity. While one person can help another by providing something to eat, the politician creates a job for that other person, and thus practices a lofty form of charity that ennobles his or her political activity. Sacrifices born of love. This charity, which is the spiritual heart of politics, is always a preferential love shown to those in greatest need. It undergirds everything we do on their behalf. Only a gaze transformed by charity can enable the dignity of others to be recognized, and as a consequence, the poor to be acknowledged and valued in their dignity, respected in their identity and culture, and this thus truly integrated into society. That gaze is at the heart of the authentic spirit of politics. It sees paths open up that are different from those of a soulless pragmatism. It makes us realize that the scandal of poverty cannot be addressed by promoting strategies of containment that only tranquilize the poor and render them tame and inoffensive. How sad it is when we find behind allegedly altruistic works, the other being reduced to passivity. What are needed are new pathways of self-expression and participation in society. Education serves these by making it possible for each human being to shape his or her own future. Here too, we see the importance of the principle of subsidiarity, which is inseparable from the principle of solidarity.
Mm-hmm. Oh man. Y'all are familiar with Nextdoor, the kind of like neighborhood Facebook?
You bet.
In our neighborhood, there's this thing right now on Nextdoor because the Ralph's that's not very far from us, that's pretty close to us, is closing. They're closing because the city of Long Beach
Imposed a bonus.
told them they had to pay their workers more, $4 an hour more. And so that's their kind of protest. They're closing that store. And now there's a proposal to build low-income housing in that space, right? So low-income housing being built in our neighborhood. And the hue and cry on Nextdoor in my neighborhood, you would not believe. And people rallying to oppose this and let the city know that we don't want any low-income housing in our neighborhood. It's mind-boggling to me. The phrase about containing poverty is what just made me think of that. It's like, and that's what we try to do, isn't it? We want to put borders around it. We don't try to solve it. We just want to put it over here in this area and keep it there and not let it spread into these other areas.
Well, we want the people to serve us so that we have our needs met, but we don't want them to have a place to live that's anywhere near us.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of an old English mansions and such. You always had the back hallway and the back stairs,
Yeah.
because the idea was that that the servants were not supposed to be seen.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And that's kind of it. You know, when we lived in Orange, there was some talk about in our congregation there about doing some Latino ministry, outreach ministry. And one of the people in our congregation, a couple of the people, in fact, were saying, "But we don't have any Latinos in our area." And and I said, "What do you mean? Don't you see them working in the grocery stores and in the other stores you go to?" And they said, "Well, yeah, but they're not. I don't see them anywhere in our neighborhoods." And then I said, "There's this long block of apartment buildings all along the freeway." And they said, "Oh," it's like they never even noticed. There was this whole Latino neighborhood that stretched the whole length of the freeway, but it was segregated all up against the freeway. And so they never saw it. They never saw it.
A hurricane has arrived. I'm sorry.
A
You're
hurricane?
having lots of wind up there? Yeah, it just blew over my screen and it's washing my windows.
No,
Anyway,
we've got rain here, but
yeah,
okay.
I was having just rain, but now it's not rain. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hope your house doesn't blow down.
Yeah, that's my hope.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt with that. Sorry, it's just.
Oh, I think that's more typical than we wish.
How sad it is when we find behind allegedly altruistic works, the other being reduced to passivity. Okay.
And yet, I guess some situations, there are some situations in which I'm thinking of the homeless and the idea of building living areas for the homeless is, that's it's kind of a situation that's so bad that we have to do something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because on the other hand, I really do agree with the value of work, and I thought it was some country, like some Norwegian country, that everybody has a task, and it might even be just keeping the area, sweeping the area in front of your house, but everybody has something to do before they get the benefit. So I've always thought that was, a wonderful idea. Should we continue?
Yeah.
These considerations help us to recognize the urgent need to combat all that threatens and violates fundamental human rights. Politics are called to tend to the needs of individuals and peoples. To tend to those in need takes strength and tenderness, effort, and generosity in the midst of functionalistic and privatized mindset that inexorably leads to a throwaway culture. It involves taking responsibility for the present with the situations of utter marginalization and anguish, and being capable of bestowing dignity upon it. It will likewise inspire intense efforts to ensure that everything be done to protect the status and dignity of the human person. Politicians are doers, builders with ambitious goals, possessed of a broad, realistic, and pragmatic gaze that looks beyond their own borders. Their biggest concern should not be about a drop in the polls, but about finding effective solutions to the phenomenon of social and economic exclusion, with its baneful consequences. Human trafficking, the marketing of human organs and tissues, the sexual exploitation of boys and girls, slave labor, including prostitution, the drugs and weapons trade, terrorism, and international organized crime. Such is the magnitude of these situations and their toll in innocent lives that we must avoid every temptation to fall into a declarationist nominalism that would assuage our consciences. We need to ensure that our institutions are truly effective in the struggle against all these scourges. This includes taking intelligent advantage of the immense resources offered by technological development.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So you can't let it drive it, but you can let it help you. Because it seems that the status and dignity of the individual ties back into the, creating passivity. But
Yeah.
we are still far from a globalization of the most basic of human rights. That is why world politics needs to make the effective elimination of hunger one of its foremost and imperative goals. Indeed, when financial speculation manipulates the price of food, treating it as just another commodity, millions of people suffer and die from hunger. At the same time, tons of food are thrown away. This constitutes a genuine scandal. Hunger is criminal. Food is an inalienable right. Often, as we carry on our semantic and ideological disputes, we allow our brothers and sisters to die of hunger and thirst without shelter or access to health care. Alongside these basic needs that remain unmet, trafficking in persons represents another source of shame for humanity, one that international politics, moving beyond fine speeches and good intentions, must no longer tolerate. These things are essential. They can no longer be deferred.
Amen. And that's a good stopping place for today, I think. Okay, final thoughts.
So everybody want to go out and run for office?
Oh, man.
It's a lot to consider.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boy.
But boy, it's a tall order for a competitive system. I mean, to get politicians not to think about what it takes to be elected. And I mean, it's a tall order to move them away from not counting votes.
Yeah, and the way our system is set up right now, it seems like they always have to keep one eye on the polls and the other eye on their fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a wonder anything gets done.
There's no time for governance.
Yeah.
Maybe the focus on truth has some benefit in it, but
Please.
I worry about arguments about truth. But
if we reinstituted the fairness doctrine, that would That would help. That would help.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the beginning of the slide, I think. Anyway.
I just
Well,
think that, we just gave Ted Cruz another reason. He was looking for gazing outside of his borders.
well, thank you all. As always, this is one of the most thought-provoking days of the week.